Good morning, Year 6, and welcome to your final reading lesson for this half term. We are going to start with paired reading, which means I'm going to do some of the reading, but you're going to also take the ownership of some of the reading, just like we did yesterday. So I'm just going to share the document so we can read through the text together. It should be big enough so you can read it off screen with me. So let's begin. Death comes to dinner. On eventide night, even the streets of dull, conservative Jackalfax came alive. The cobbled stretch of Empire Road had swelled from a merry hum of good spirits in the morning to raucous, uncontainable revelry in the final hours before midnight. Street bands paid for coins on every corner, competing for the attention of passers-by. Coloured lanterns jostled with streamers and strings of tiny lights, and the air smelt of beer, burnt sugar, and meat grilling on the spit. The blackened sky-faced clock loomed above the celebrations. At midnight it would fade to the colour of morning tide. A pale, promising pink and a spring of one would bring a fresh beginning for everyone. The night was uncommon and crowded with possibility. For everyone, that is, except Morrigan Crow. Morrigan's night held only one possibility. Like every other child born precisely 11 years ago on the last eventide, when the clock struck midnight, she would die. The 11 short years of her doomed life complete, her curse finally fulfilled. Now, I would like you to continue reading from the Crows right till the end of Cease to Exist. So you're going to pause the video here and continue reading. Think about the expression and intonation within your voice whilst you read. Fantastic expression, Year 6. Let me continue now. She hoped it would be painless. She'd read somewhere that when a cursed child died, it was usually quick and peaceful, just like falling asleep. She wondered what would happen afterwards. Would she really go to the better place like Cook had once told her? Was the divine thing real? And would it accept her with open arms as she'd been promised? Morrigan had to hope so. The alternative simply didn't bear thinking about. After hearing Cook's tales of the wicked thing that dwelled in the worst place, she slept with the light on for a week. It was a strange thing, she thought, to be celebrating the night of your own death, again suggesting it's quite weird to be celebrating the night of your own death. It didn't feel like a birthday. It didn't feel like a celebration at all. It was more like having your funeral before you die. Just as she was wondering if anyone would say a few words about her, Corvus cleared his throat. Morrigan, Ivy and Grandmother looked at him, their hands pausing halfway in their mouths with forks full of lamb and peas. I just wanted to say, he began, and then seemed to lose momentum. But seemed to lose momentum was almost as if he was seeming to lose his words. He felt quite nervous the words weren't coming out. I just wanted to say... Ivy's eyes misted over and she squeezed his hand encouragingly. Go on, dear, again suggesting that they have an announcement and she's encouraging him to speak out and not to feel nervous. He tried again and cleared his throat loudly. I just wanted to say that... that the lamb is very good, cooked to perfection, nice and pink. There were murmurs of agreement around the table, which suggests people were whispering around the table, agreeing that the food was good, and the clinking of cutlery as everyone carried on eating. That was probably as good as it was going to get, Morrigan realised, and she couldn't say she disagreed about the lamb. Now, I would like you to continue from, well, if nobody minds, right till the end of Humble Serenity. So you're going to pause the video and continue reading here, thinking about the fluency within your voice, not missing any of the full stops or punctuation. Fantastic, Year 6. Now I'm going to continue. Corvus wasn't sure if I should say anything, but I know Morrigan wouldn't mind. Go on, Morrigan said. It's fine, really, go ahead. Ivy beamed at her, which means she almost looked over at her straight away for the first time ever, and emboldened, which suggests that she had the courage to stand up from her seat. Corvus and I are having a baby. The room felt silent, then a great smash came from the doorway as the maid dropped a platter. Corvus tried to smile at his young wife, but it came out as a grimace, suggesting his facial expression was quite annoyed, quite angry. Well, Ivy prompted them. Aren't you going to congratulate us? Ivy, dear, Grandmother said, smiling icily at her daughter-in-law. Perhaps your announcement might have been better received at a less sensitive time. For instance, the day after my only grandchild is due to leave us tragically at the age of 11. Strangely, her words made Morrigan perk up a little, which means she almost made her quite happy. It was perhaps the most sentimental, again, memorable thing she'd ever heard Grandmother say. She felt an unexpected warmth towards the savage old bird of prey. But this is a good thing, don't you see? Ivy said, looking to Corvus for support. He squeezed the bridge of his nose as if warding off a migraine. It's like the circle of life. One life may be snuffed out, but another is being brought into the world. Why? It's practically a miracle. Grandmother groaned faintly, again suggesting that she's quite annoyed at Ivy's behaviour here, being quite selfish she is. Ivy was relentless, suggesting she was being very persistent about her pregnancy. You'll have a new grandchild, Ornella. Corvus will have a new daughter, or a son. Wouldn't that be lovely? A little boy, Corvy. You said you'd always wanted a boy. We can dress him in little black suits to match his daddy. Now, I would like you to continue from Morrigan tried not to laugh to the end of enough. Again, there's a lot of dialogue here, so thinking about your intonation, if you're grandmother, how you're going to sound different to if you were Ivy, for example. So thinking about that and reading along the text. So pause the video here, please. Fantastic, Year 6. I heard such lovely grandmother voices. Now I'm going to continue. Doesn't anybody care that I'm with child? Like I said yesterday, with child is an old-fashioned way to say that I'm pregnant, shouted Ivy, stamping her foot. Doesn't anybody care that I'm about to die? Morrigan shouted in return. Can we please talk about me for a minute? I told you not to say the D word, boomed grandmother. There were 3 loud knocks on the front door. Silence fell. Well done, Year 6. I'm now going to start your do now, which is ordering the text. So there are a number of events here which you need to order as you do in class. What I've done here is actually number them 1 to 6. So if you prefer just to number them and then order the text, that's absolutely fine. Or if you want to write out the sentences and then order the text, that's also fine as well. So I'd like you to pause the video here and complete your do now. If you got through your do now, what I'm going to do is reveal the answer, so please do not continue with the video, only continue once you have finished. Okay, so the answers are here for you. What I've done actually here is put the page numbers in, and this will help you when you are looking to order the text, because it will have to follow that chronological order of the numbers throughout the pages. So the first one is 4th in the text, the second sentence is 2 in the text, the third one is 1st in the text, the fourth one is 6th in the text, the fifth one is 3rd in the text, and then the final one, number 6, is 5th in the text. Okay, so well done if you got those correct. If you haven't, please just go in and write the correct answer next to your answer. So what I'm going to do now is complete my shared example. So this is an example that I'm going to complete, and you're going to watch me complete it under the visualizer. My question is, how can you tell grandmother was not impressed by Ivy's behaviour? So we need to look for evidence that supports why grandmother was not impressed by Ivy's behaviour. It's a 3-mark question, which means I need to give 2 different pieces of evidence to support this statement of grandmother not being impressed by Ivy's behaviour. So it's really important I give 2 different pieces of evidence because I want to score 4 marks. So just watch me do this under the visualizer. You do not have to attempt this question. If you want to have a practice first, that's absolutely fine, but I'm going to do this question with you here first. So you can see my presentation here. I've written today's date, Wednesday the 10th of February 2021, reading because that's the subject I'm doing. I've ordered my text and I've also marked through them, and now I'm going to answer my shared example question. So my shared example is, how can you tell grandmother was not impressed by Ivy's behaviour? Please do not worry about firstly completing this question, because this is my question that I'm going to model to you, and secondly you don't have to write out the question. I'm only doing that so I don't have to switch between slides. So I need the text in front of me because I need to use evidence to support my question. I've already highlighted, underlined, 2 pieces of evidence here, and the first piece of evidence I've underlined is grandmother said, smiling icily at her daughter-in-law. This suggests that grandmother's quite angry towards Ivy because of her behaviour. She's just announced that she's pregnant at a very sensitive time. I've also underlined grandmother groaned faintly, which suggests that she's quite annoyed. She's not impressed by Ivy's behaviour, as she's still persisting with talking about her pregnancy at the dinner table. So what I'm going to do is now answer this question using those 2 pieces of evidence. I'm going to start off my answer by saying grandmother was not impressed with Ivy's behaviour as she looked at her daughter-in-law angrily. That's what I'm going to say. As she looked at Ivy angrily. Full stop. The evidence states, because now I'm going to put my evidence in. The evidence states, and quotation because I'm taking this directly from the text, smiling icily. smiling icily at her daughter-in-law, suggesting to me here that she was not happy with her behaviour. Now, I'm going to read that over to double check that I've got my 2 marks for supporting my point, which is grandmother was not impressed by Ivy's behaviour. Grandmother was not impressed with Ivy's behaviour. She looked at Ivy angrily. The evidence states smiling icily at her daughter-in-law. Perfect. I think I definitely have 2 marks here, so I'm just going to put 2 ticks here so I know that I've got my 2 marks. Now my final mark is going to come from my final piece of evidence, which is grandmother groaned faintly. So I'm going to write, additionally, grandmother is annoyed at Ivy as she is persistently, which means she's continuously persistently talking about her pregnancy, full stop. And I'm going to write down the evidence. The evidence states grandmother groaned faintly, which means she was annoyed, not impressed by her behaviour. She was showing it. She was almost being quite kind in the way she was showing it because she didn't want to get caught that she was, being rude to her. So I'm just going to double check that I've got my last mark here, and that is additionally, grandmother is annoyed at Ivy as she is persistently talking about her pregnancy. The evidence states grandmother groaned faintly. Definitely, I would give myself a mark for that last point, supported with evidence. So I have actually got 3 out of 3 marks here because I've supported my statement, which is not impressed with Ivy's behaviour, with 2 pieces of evidence, and I have been able to explain that. So we're now going to move on to your questions. These are both the questions that you need to answer yourself. Please think about your presentation. Have a look at how I have shown my work. I've written today's date, reading, because that's the subject I'm doing. That's my do now. I've completed and I've marked. And now you're going to write independent example and your answer. There's 2 independent examples, so you must complete both independent examples. So I'm just going to switch over to my PowerPoint. Okay, so it's now your turn. There's 2 independent examples for you to complete, which means you need to have 2 3-mark questions. The first one is Morrigan is scared about her impending death. Impending means her upcoming death that is looming. Okay, and you need to use evidence from the text to support this statement. So it's really important you use 2 different pieces of evidence to suggest that she's scared about her upcoming death. Your second independent example is using evidence from the text. What impressions do you get of Ivy's character? Impressions, these are adjectives you can use to describe Ivy's character. For example, I would say she's quite selfish, and the piece of evidence that I would use to explain that is the fact that, she was persisting with her pregnancy at the wrong time. So you're going to have a go at these 2 questions. Please lay your work out just like I have shown you under my visualizer earlier. It's really important you do that. I'm going to reveal the answers to you all. It's really important that you mark along your work. If I haven't mentioned something and you think it's still correct, please do not mark it. Just send it in on Seesaw and your teachers will have a look. Okay, so I'm going to show you some examples that you may have written. So for the first one, Morrigan is scared about her impending death. Use evidence from the text to support this statement. So I've taken a few pieces of evidence to support that Morrigan was quite scared about her upcoming death. The first one was she was conscious, which means she was wary of every mouthful of food she took. Next, I said she she said that she was going to be bolted out of existence, which suggests she's feeling quite scared because she knows that she's going to die. You could have written, she gets angry and says, doesn't anybody care that I'm about to die? Remember at the dinner table when everyone was talking about Ivy's pregnancy, that's what she said. And then lastly, she hoped that her death would be painless, which again, she's suggesting that she was scared because she's thinking about what her death would be like. So if you've written or picked out any pieces of these evidence, that's absolutely fine. If you've got something else, that's fine. Just leave it blank, do not mark it, and your teachers will have a look on Seesaw. Next, your second independent example, that is using evidence from the text. What impressions, remember I said that's the adjectives used to describe Ivy's character, and it's 3 marks, so you need 2 different impressions and 2 pieces of evidence. My first impression you may have written is she's quite insensitive. She keeps talking about her new baby, even though Morrigan is about to die. You could have she's relentless, which means she's persistent with how she's talking about her pregnancy. She keeps talking about it at the dinner table. And that piece of evidence, she keeps discussing her baby despite grandmother telling her to stop. I've got she's bold or brave, that would come under the same mark, and that is because she said she's not been a member of this family for too long, and then she gives, she blurts out her personal information to them. So again, that's suggesting that she's quite bold, she's quite courageous, quite bold, quite brave as well. And then lastly, like I said earlier, another impression that I have of her is she's quite selfish. She says, doesn't anybody care that I'm with child? She wants to make the situation all about her and her pregnancy and not talk about Morrigan at this time. So if you've written one of these impressions, that's absolutely fine. If you've got something else, that she's quite unkind, because she's talking about herself at a quite sensitive time, that would also give you a mark. So again, if I haven't mentioned something and you've written a different impression, that's absolutely fine. Just leave it and your teachers can mark that on Seesaw. If you've written something that's completely different and you don't think the impression works, just go in with a different colour pen and write down the impression and the piece of evidence that would support that impression. So well done for getting through to the end of the video, Year 6, and I will see you tomorrow for RE Day.